we were talking earlier a little bit about the self and the soul, right?
Yes.
There's no way to conceive of what we are without bringing in the fact that we have language. I think all animals have the gift of language to some extent because they do communicate with each other, right? But we have the gift of language at a certain level where you have meta-linguistic constructions, which I suppose that language that the animals do not have. Though I'm not even sure of that in some cases. Okay,
Sure.
but there's no way to think that we could have a conception of what we are without bringing in the fact that we are language endowed creatures. And so, if there are limits to language, then those are limits to what we are. They are our limits, and they have to be a very important part of how we think of ourselves.
So we also think, as I mentioned, we tend to think that the role of language, a primary role of language, is to package up what's inside here and then throw it to you, and hopefully you get something
Sure.
similar in your brain. And then another is to reference something that's out in the world.
Yes.
Okay. Then there are problems with this whole act of reference in the philosophy of language.
Yes.
Like the twin earth argument and so forth.
Yeah.
Okay. But that doesn't mean language doesn't have something to do with reality. It just means that the relationship between language and reality isn't merely reference. Okay. So this question is so important to me. But it's so beguiling. It's so tricky. The relationship between language and reality. And as we spoke about souls, as we spoke about the self, I do want to get to religious questions later. Even in the New Testament, there's the word or the logos, which has a creative aspect.
Yes.
We'll get to these religious questions soon. So people who are interested in those, you can keep listening. But I want you to talk about the limits of language.
This is a subject in logic, or perhaps to say in meta logic, where logicians especially were interested in constructing representations of language. And the question was always, can we get a representation of natural language, the language that we speak, right? So when we make up the computer languages, right, they are artificial languages, but they are very useful. When mathematics was formalized, like Euclid wrote geometry in one way, but Hilbert writes it in a formal way. He constructed a formal language for Euclidean geometry, right? It's very useful to do that. The question is, to what extent is this possible? Is it possible to actually construct a representation of the language that we have? Now, there's a bit of ambiguity here because language develops historically. So we have language now that Galileo didn't have. Some of his language we probably don't have anymore. Some language dropped by the wayside, but mostly it got enriched, richer and richer and richer. Today we have language in which you can express today's scientific theories. That language didn't exist in the time of Galileo, right? So.
Oh, in just a moment. When you say richer, you just means able to express more?
Yes, able to express more, right? So that at the time, there are things that we can express now that haven't been within the possibility of expression at the time. In one sense, namely in the sense that it wasn't in the with the language that he had, but there were always the resources to enrich that language because look, it did get enriched. It got enriched to this point where we have now.
Right.
Okay, so we have two things. We have the language that we have, and we have the resources for enriching language, right? Now, suppose we ask whether, in principle, we could have a language that could express anything we could think. We could have a universal language, right? What logicians find immediately is that it runs into paradoxes. You run into some, paradoxes. You have you want to say things about what is true, what is false, and what could be true, and so on. And we could go into one of these paradoxes if you like.
Well, before you get into the paradox, are you
Yeah.
saying that the paradox is with the fact that there exists the resources to create such a universal language, or is the paradox with the concept of a universal language?
It's the problem is with the possibility of creating a universal language.
Okay.
We don't say that we have it now, right? But could we create a language in which everything that we could think could be expressed, right? And you get a problem about self-reference there, because that means that you would have to also be able to express statements about that very language itself. And there's the question: can you code that? Can you? And to some extent, it is possible to code meta language into object language, as they say. But are there limits to it? Yes, there are limits to it. Yeah. That there are that was Tarski who proved some of the theorems, right? About the limits of what you can say in a language, right? So, but we can say, okay, look, maybe there's not maybe you can go a little bit further. Maybe there's not one single language in which you could express everything, but we have a language that we could enrich in many different ways, right? So there are many different possible enrichments of the language.
Uh-huh.
Now, couldn't we say that anything that you could ever think could be expressed in one of those, right?
Okay.
And that would be, that seems like a more liberal conception. But no, the answer is the same kind of paradoxes arrive there, right? And the answer is no, you can't. Now, so what does this mean? That we can't have language? No, of course not. We have language, right? Or that we cannot enrich it arbitrarily? No, we can, right? But what these paradoxes show is that we could not possibly have an adequate representation of our language, period, right? I mean, take our language as a whole, the language it is and could be. We cannot have an adequate representation of that. And well, that means, of course, that if we are language beings, then we cannot have an adequate representation of ourselves. In the end, we cannot have an adequate representation of ourselves. And this is, it doesn't, it doesn't mean that we are better than computers when it comes to calculating ability, or computers have finite storage. We have finite storage. They can calculate anything we can calculate. I'm not giving the kind of argument that was given in the 50s about how we are. We're not outstripping. We cannot possibly out. These limitative theorems do not show that we are better than computers. That's not the point. That's not the thing at all. It is rather that when it comes to representing ourselves, which is a way of trying to answer the question, what am I?
Uh-huh.
We can't give an adequate answer. It's impossible. It's logically impossible.
You use the word adequate there. So we can't give an adequate representation or an adequate answer, but we can presumably we can give a representation, or we can give an answer. It's just not adequate. So what do you mean by adequate?
Okay, so you take a particular part of our language that we need, for example, say in the insurance business. Yeah, we can make up a good representation of that, a totally adequate representation of that language. Okay, it's part of our natural language, right? And we as logicians and mathematicians and scientists are always working in natural language. So we're using one part of natural language to construct the model of another part. And we can always do that. We can always do that. Okay? But the idea that we could do this for our language as a whole, that's what's ruled out.
The Economist covers math, physics, philosophy, and AI in a manner that shows how different countries perceive developments and how they impact markets. They recently published a piece on China's new neutrino detector. They cover extending life via mitochondrial transplants, creating an entirely new field of medicine. But it's also not just science. They analyze culture, they analyze finance, economics, business, international affairs across every region. I'm particularly liking their new Insider feature. It was just launched this month. It gives me a front row access to The Economist's internal editorial debates, where senior editors argue through the news with world leaders and policymakers in twice weekly long format shows. Basically, an extremely high quality podcast. Whether it's scientific innovation or shifting global politics, The Economist provides comprehensive coverage beyond headlines. As a TOE listener, you get a special discount. Head over to economist.com/TOE to subscribe. That's economist.com/TOE for your discount.